The ballroom lights had long gone dark, but one man walked in late, his shoes echoing in a hall meant for celebration. Andrew Whitaker, a 45-year-old tech millionaire, had built a company that promised to bring families closer, yet he himself seemed further away from the people who mattered most. Waiting in the shadows was Claire Bennett, a woman 10 years younger, carrying both the quiet strength of a caretaker and the exhaustion of debts that threatened to take her family's diner. Two lives that should never have crossed, one consumed by deadlines and investors. The other by hospital bills and midnight shifts were about to collide under the hum of failing lights and a winter storm outside. But here's the question. Can a man who spent his life chasing success learn to show up before it's too late? Can a woman who has always sacrificed for others dare to believe that someone might stand by her side? And when business, loyalty, and love pull in opposite directions, what compass will they follow? Stay with us for this journey of heartbreak, courage, and rediscovery. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story that shines light in unexpected places. The Blue Harbor Maritime Hall had already gone quiet. Hours earlier, the old shipyard-turned-museum had been filled with music, clinking glasses, and polite laughter. Now it lay in silence, except for the groan of the Atlantic wind rushing against the tall glass windows. Posters celebrating caregivers, streamers in company colors, and wilting bouquets remained, faint reminders of a night that had passed without him. Snowflakes clung to the dark overcoat of Andrew Whitaker as he pushed open the heavy oak doors. He stepped inside, brushing crystals of ice from his shoulders, his breath fogging in the chilly air. The sound of his polished shoes echoed against the marble floor, too loud in the hollow space. It was nearly midnight. It was supposed to have been his night, a fundraiser honoring families caring for loved ones. Harbor Light Health Tech, the company he had built from nothing, was the lead sponsor. Yet Andrew had missed all of it. He loosened his tie, feeling the sting of regret pressing down harder than the cold. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, another reminder of the boardroom fire he had been forced to put out. The partnership with a major hospital system had nearly collapsed after a software glitch threatened patient safety. Hours of tense calls, emergency reviews, and damage control had kept him locked away, while his employees, investors, and friends gathered here without him. Andrew stopped near the center of the vast hall. A banner still hung across the main stage, celebrating the hands that care. Rows of empty chairs stretched out beneath it, each one earlier filled by someone with a story of sacrifice, patience, and devotion. His gaze caught on a display board filled with photographs of caregivers, gray-haired husbands helping wives into wheelchairs, adult daughters reading beside hospital beds, little children hugging tired mothers in aprons. He felt a heaviness in his chest. He had meant this night to honor them, yet he had chosen a conference call instead of being here. Movement stirred in the far corner. At first he thought the hall was empty, but then he noticed a woman bent over a table stacked with folders. Claire Bennett, his executive secretary, was still working. A single desk lamp cast a warm pool of light over her papers, contrasting with the shadowed emptiness around her. Her hair was pulled back, a few strands loose near her cheeks. She had removed her jacket hours ago, and her navy dress showed the wear of a long evening. Yet her focus remained steady as she arranged donor pledge forms into neat piles and typed notes for follow-up letters. Andrew felt an unexpected pang of guilt. She should have been home by now, resting, not staying late to clean up the loose ends of an event he hadn't even attended. Of course she stayed, he muttered under his breath. Though the sound was swallowed by the cavernous hall, Claire always stayed. She was dependable in ways he never fully acknowledged. His phone buzzed again. He pulled it out, thumb hovering over the screen, more unread messages, meeting requests, reminders of tomorrow's load. With a groan, he silenced it and slipped it back into his pocket. The constant noise had become a shield, one that also kept him from noticing the people who mattered. Andrew stepped closer to the caregiver board, his eyes pausing on one particular photograph. A middle-aged man was shown spoon-feeding his elderly mother in a kitchen that looked barely large enough for two chairs. The man's face carried exhaustion, but also tenderness. Andrew thought of his own father, a sailor who had spent most of his life at sea. Toward the end, when illness came, Andrew had been too busy chasing investors in Boston to sit by his bedside. The guilt of that absence still lingered like salt water on a wound. Behind him, the shuffle of papers drew his attention back to Claire. He saw her tuck a stack into a box labeled "Thank You Letters," her handwriting looping across the side. She worked with the care of someone who believed each detail mattered. On the wall nearby, a roster of volunteers remained taped in place. He scanned the names and found hers among them. Claire Bennett listed not only as staff, but also as a volunteer for the Caregiver Appreciation Booth. She had given her time twice over tonight, once as his employee, and again as a citizen who cared. A wave of mixed emotions swept through him, gratitude that she was here, and shame that he had not been. He ran a hand across his jaw, rough with late-night stubble, and drew in a deep breath. His success had always demanded sacrifices, but in this quiet hall, he felt the cost more clearly than ever. There were victories measured in dollars, and then there were moments like this. Moments he kept missing. As Andrew stood there, the lights overhead flickered slightly, a reminder that the storm outside was still fierce. Claire glanced up, noticing him for the first time. Their eyes met across the wide, empty hall. She gave a small, polite smile, then returned to her work. Andrew remained where he was, rooted by a mixture of exhaustion, admiration, and regret. The hall smelled faintly of melting wax and cold air, the remnants of a night that should have meant more. In that silence, he wondered what it would take to stop living only for numbers on a report and start being present for the people standing right in front of him. Andrew slipped his hand into the inside pocket of his coat, feeling the familiar coolness of metal beneath the fabric. His fingers closed around a small brass compass, its surface worn smooth from decades of touch. It had belonged to his father, a sailor who had believed in both the sea and the stars. The compass was not expensive. Its lid squeaked when opened, and the glass face carried a hairline crack across the top. Yet to Andrew, it carried more weight than any of the sleek awards displayed in his office. It reminded him of who he was before headlines and investors defined him. He flipped the lid open and watched the needle twitch until it found north. The faint scrape of the hinge brought back the sound of waves breaking against the docks of Port Harrington, the small coastal town where he grew up. He could almost smell the salt air and the diesel of fishing boats, hear gulls crying overhead as his father's vessel pulled away from the pier. His father, Daniel Whitaker, had spent most of his life at sea. He was a man of few words, but he carried a steady presence that gave Andrew a sense of direction, even during childhood storms. His mother, Margaret, had worked at the local post office, steady hands sorting letters while keeping the household afloat. Andrew had been raised in modest circumstances. His childhood was filled with practical lessons: how to patch a net, how to read the tide chart, how to fix a squeaky hinge with little more than oil and patience. But the most enduring lesson came one autumn afternoon when his father pressed the compass into his 12-year-old palm. "Son," his father had said, "you'll get lost sometimes, out on the water or in life. When you do, use this. It won't tell you what to want, but it'll tell you where you stand. The rest is up to you." Andrew had carried it ever since, but when his father fell ill years later, Andrew had not been there. He had been in Boston, standing under harsh fluorescent lights, delivering a pitch to venture capitalists about a prototype that promised to transform the way families could monitor their aging parents. His phone had vibrated in his pocket with a call from his mother, but he silenced it. He was mid-sentence, trying to convince investors that his dream was worth their millions. By the time he returned the call, his father's voice was gone forever. That memory still pressed against his chest with the sharpness of regret. He had built Harbor Light Health Tech in part to atone for that absence. He wanted to create tools that would allow children to remain connected to their parents no matter where they were. His first design sketches even bore the phrase, "Begin with wonder." Back then, wonder had been his compass wonder at the idea that technology could carry love across distance. But over time, the phrase had been buried beneath quarterly goals, shareholder expectations, and endless charts. Wonder had been replaced by key performance indicators. Authentic connection had been replaced by market share. Andrew sighed and closed the compass, slipping it back into his pocket. His phone vibrated again. He pulled it out reluctantly, expecting more hospital updates or say calendar alerts. Instead, the name flashing on the screen was Michael O'Connell, his oldest friend and Harbor Light's chief operating officer. Andrew answered, lowering his voice in the quiet hall. "Andrew," Michael said without preamble, his tone brisk. "I just got off a call with Victoria Lang's team. They're making an offer, a serious one." Andrew leaned against the edge of a table, staring at the abandoned centerpieces of carnations and seagrass. "What kind of offer? Capital injection large enough to triple our rollout speed," Michael said. "But they want more than stock. They want control of the product roadmap, direct oversight of data strategy. Basically, they want a seat at the wheel." Andrew pressed his thumb against the edge of the compass in his pocket. The weight of the metal felt heavier. Control of the roadmap means control of the mission. Or survival, Michael countered. "We're stretched thin. You know it." The hospital scare rattled confidence. Victoria's fund could stabilize everything. Andrew's jaw tightened. He could picture Victoria Lang sharp, calculating. Her reputation built on transforming vulnerable companies into profitable empires. On paper, she represented opportunity, but he knew the cost once she had the wheel. Harbor Light might steer away from families and toward profit margins alone. "I'll think about it," he said, though the words tasted hollow. When he ended the call, the hall seemed even quieter. He turned his gaze back to the stage where the caregiver photographs still hung, faces lined with sacrifice. Hands holding other hands, these were the people Harbor Light was supposed to serve. Would they be served better with more money and speed, or betrayed by surrendering to someone else's priorities? The contradiction gnawed at him. His father's compass had once pointed toward wonder. Now his board pushed him toward control and compromise. Which direction was true? Andrew rubbed his temple, fatigue pressing in. He knew he couldn't untangle the question tonight. What he could do was at least make sure the details of the fundraiser were intact. Despite his absence, donors had given and promises had been made. He needed to see them with his own eyes. He crossed the hall toward the volunteer roster taped near the entrance. His eyes scanned the names until one stopped him, cold, Claire Bennett. She hadn't only coordinated logistics as his assistant. She had signed up as a volunteer, working the caregiver appreciation booth. The realization struck him harder than Michael's call. She had given her time, not just as an employee, but as a neighbor, a daughter, a citizen who cared. Andrew's chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and shame. He had missed the night's speeches, the laughter, the music, but she had stayed, quietly doing what mattered. He turned toward the glow of her desk lamp in the corner, where she was still bent over her papers. For a moment, he simply stood there, the compass heavy in his pocket, wondering if perhaps the direction he needed wasn't on a dial at all, but in the quiet loyalty of people like her. By the time the last of the banners had been folded and the ballroom lights dimmed, Claire Bennett was still at her desk. Her fingers moved steadily across the keys of her laptop, drafting thank you notes for donors, logging pledge amounts, and marking envelopes with neat strokes of her pen. She was used to being the one who stayed after everyone else had gone. During the day, she was Andrew Whitaker's executive secretary, keeper of schedules, filter of phone calls, the person who made sure chaos wore the disguise of order. But when the office hours ended, another life waited for her. Claire was 34, but some days she felt twice that age. After leaving the corporate tower in Portland, she drove 20 miles north to Port Harrington, where her mother's diner stood like a stubborn relic against the cold. Bennett's Diner had a neon sign shaped like a lighthouse, buzzing faintly, refusing to go dark even when storms rattled the windows. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs. Some were of local fishermen, faces weathered by wind and salt, holding their best catches. Others were of sailors in uniform, including Claire's late father, grinning in a Navy cap. The pictures told a story of community and endurance, of men and women who gave their strength to the sea and came back hungry for warmth. Her father's picture hung above the booth he always favored. He had died when Claire was only 20, leaving her and her mother to carry the diner through lean years. Ellen Bennett, now in her 60s, still baked pies each morning, her hands stiff with arthritis yet determined. Her laughter filled the diner on good days. But lately, her breath came shorter, her steps slower. Medical bills had piled up after a heart surgery, and though Ellen insisted she was fine, the pharmacy receipts told another story. Claire kept every slip of paper in a binder, along with utility bills, mortgage statements, and loan documents. At night, after wiping down counters and closing the register, she sat at the kitchen table with a calculator, adding and subtracting until her head ached. Every dollar had to stretch. Every pill had to be rationed with care. Her graduate classes in nonprofit management were supposed to prepare her for building organizations that helped families like hers. Instead, tuition payments became one more line in her ledger. She often wondered if she was chasing a dream she couldn't afford. And yet, Claire carried herself with quiet dignity. She wore simple dresses, polished shoes, and always kept her hair tied back. She never complained, never sought attention. At the Maritime Hall fundraiser, she had filled the gaps left by absent staff without asking for credit. When a volunteer went home early, she stepped in. When a donor needed reassurance, she provided it with a calm smile. She was not the kind of person who waited for thanks. She simply did what was necessary. The truth was, she had grown used to patching holes at home, at work, and in her own heart. As she stacked the last of the folders, her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it, thinking it was another class reminder. But when she saw the sender Harrington Credit Services, her stomach tightened. The message was blunt. The outstanding loan for the diner had been sold to a recovery agency. Payment was required in full within 60 days. Failure to comply would result in foreclosure and seizure of assets. Her throat went dry. She sat frozen, the glow of the screen making the words blur. She had known they were behind, but she thought there was more time. The storm she feared was no longer distant. It was at their door. She closed her eyes, picturing her mother unlocking the diner each morning, humming softly as she brewed the first pot of coffee. She imagined the regulars, old fishermen, truck drivers, young couples filing in for pancakes and pie. The diner was more than a business. It was a heartbeat in the town. Losing it would be like losing her father all over again. Claire slipped the phone back into her purse, forcing her hands to steady. She gathered the folders, stacked the pens, and turned off the desk lamp. The hall was nearly dark now, only a faint light filtering in from the glass windows that faced the harbor. She walked slowly toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Each sound echoed, too loud in the emptiness. She paused at the volunteer roster taped near the door, where her own name still lingered in black ink. For a moment, she thought of Andrew, how he had missed the entire evening, how his absence had been explained away as business. She wondered if he knew how much she had covered for him, how many loose ends she had tied without being asked. But she did not resent him. Not really. His world was different from hers, full of demands and expectations she could only imagine. She was just a cog in the machine, and machines always demanded more. When she pushed open the heavy doors, a blast of cold air struck her face. Snow was falling harder now, wet flakes clinging to her coat and scarf. The street lamps glowed weakly through the storm, and the harbor beyond was hidden in white. She pulled her wool hat lower and started toward her car, her mind still replaying the words of the message. 60 days, or maybe less. Above her, the branches of the harbor trees bent under the weight of snow, groaning in the wind. The storm was coming fast, and she still had miles to drive before home. She tightened her grip on the folder bag at her side. Inside were the donor pledges, the promises made tonight. Somehow, they felt heavier than usual, as if carrying both hope and burden at once. Claire whispered a silent prayer that tomorrow would bring clarity, then stepped into the swirling snow. The following morning, Claire arrived at the office before dawn. The storm had left the streets coated in a white silence, the kind that muffled every sound except the crunch of her boots on packed snow. She carried a small velvet pouch tucked safely in her bag, a gift she had debated giving for weeks. She had found the compass tucked inside an old box of company archives, buried among handwritten notes from Harbor Light's earliest days. At first, she had thought it just another forgotten trinket, but when she read the faint words scribbled across the yellowed notebook beside it, "Begin with wonder," something stirred. She remembered hearing Andrew say those very words once in passing, almost wistful, as if recalling a different version of himself. The compass had been dulled by time. Its brass casing was scratched, the glass cloudy. Yet when she turned it in her palm, she saw potential. She bought a polishing cloth and worked at it during quiet hours in the diner's back booth, gently rubbing away the years. Each stroke felt like a prayer, as if she were coaxing light back into an object that had lost its shine. When the brass finally gleamed, she asked a craftsman in town to engrave the phrase on the lid. "Begin with wonder." The words fit perfectly, not only on the compass, but on the man she hoped would remember what they once meant. Now, in the quiet office, she placed the pouch on Andrew's desk. The storm outside rattled the windows, a reminder that the world was never as predictable as a calendar entry. She hesitated for a long moment before stepping back, her heart pounding at the thought of him finding it. Later that day, Andrew entered his office after another string of tense calls. His face looked pale, his shoulders tight with exhaustion. He tossed his gloves on the desk and noticed the velvet pouch. For a moment, he assumed it was another business gift from a partner. But when he untied the cord and tipped it into his hand, the compass slid out with a soft clink. He froze. The sight of it pulled him backward through years. He saw his father's weathered hands. He smelled salt and engine oil. He heard gulls screaming over Port Harrington's docks. And then his eyes fell on the lid. The words were clear, freshly engraved, "Begin with wonder." His throat tightened. He hadn't written those words in nearly 20 years. Only one person could have known. Someone had gone through the archives, sifted through his beginnings, and cared enough to return a piece of him he had forgotten. Andrew sat heavily in his chair, holding the compass between both palms. For once, he did not think about stock prices or market confidence. He thought about the boy who once dreamed of building bridges between families, not building an empire for investors. The compass needle quivered, then stilled, pointing north. But for Andrew, it pointed somewhere else toward the simple truth that someone in this office saw him as more than a CEO. Claire Bennett had given him back a memory, and with it, a part of himself. A vibration broke the silence. His phone buzzed across the desk. Reluctantly, he answered. It was Michael. "Andrew, we've got a problem," Michael said without greeting. "The hospital in Boston is threatening to suspend our expansion contract unless we deliver the updated safety patch within 2 weeks. They're not willing to risk another incident." Andrew rubbed his forehead, the weight of the compass still heavy in his other hand. 2 weeks. The team said they'd need a month at least. "They don't care," Michael replied. "No patch, no contract, and if we lose Boston, the others will follow." Andrew closed his eyes, picturing the caregiver photographs from the fundraiser, the faces of those who depended on Harbor Light's tools. If the contracts collapsed, the very people they served would suffer. "I'll call the engineers tonight," he said finally, though dread curled in his stomach. When he hung up, the storm outside howled louder, as if echoing the chaos inside him. He slipped the compass back into its pouch, fingers lingering on the engraving. "Begin with wonder." But how could wonder survive deadlines that demanded miracles? That evening, he left his office with the compass in his pocket, its weight both comfort and burden. Snow drove sideways through the streets as he walked back toward the Maritime Hall to review donor commitments. The storm had grown fierce, battering the glass windows of the old museum. Inside, he found Claire still at work, her coat draped over a chair, her hair escaping its neat bun. She looked up in surprise as he entered, snow dusting his shoulders. "The roads are closing soon," she warned softly. The storm's not letting up. Andrew glanced toward the massive ship models that lined the hall. Their sails, frozen in place, cast shadows in the dim light. The building groaned under the wind, but the two of them were safe inside for now. When the doors locked behind them, sealing out the storm, Andrew realized something unusual. For the first time in years, he was not rushing to leave, not checking his watch. He was here, grounded by a compass that pointed not to north, but to a woman who had quietly polished away the dust of his past and returned it to him, shining. The storm tightened its grip on the coast that night. By the time Andrew and Claire realized they were locked inside the maritime hall, the power lines had already begun to fail. The lights flickered, buzzing overhead, before cutting out entirely. For a moment, the vast space was plunged into silence, broken only by the groan of the wind pressing against the old ship beams. Then, with a sputter, the backup generator kicked in. Its hum was weak, unreliable, casting the hall in a patchwork of dim emergency lights. The air grew colder by the hour. Andrew found a small crate of supplies, wool blankets, bottled water, a few hand warmers. Claire, practical as always, filled a metal kettle from a jug and set it atop a portable heating unit until steam curled into the air. They sat across from each other at a wooden table near the model of a whaling ship, the glow of a battery lantern softening the sharp edges of the room. Claire poured hot water into 2 mugs and dropped in sprigs of dried mint she had carried in her bag. A habit from the diner kitchen. The scent spread, sharp and soothing, filling the cold air with a hint of home. Andrew wrapped his hands around the warm mug. The heat seeped into his fingers, easing the stiffness. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Feels good," he murmured. Claire nodded, blowing gently on her drink. She pulled her wool gloves tighter, the ones her mother had knitted, the yarn slightly frayed at the fingertips. She placed them on the table between them, as if offering proof of another life beyond boardrooms and deadlines. For a while they worked in silence. Claire organized the last of the donor letters, checking names against the pledge sheets. Andrew, curious, leaned closer. She opened her laptop, the glow lighting her face, and he saw her scroll through a medical appointment calendar. "It's for my mother," she explained quietly. "I use Harbor Light's app to keep track of her medications and follow-up visits. It's easier than sticky notes on the fridge." Andrew studied the screen. He recognized the interface his company's product, but seeing it here, tied to her mother's care, felt different. It was no longer a chart on a presentation slide. It was her life. "She's lucky to have you," he said softly. Claire shook her head. Lucky would mean not needing it at all. Her voice held no bitterness, only weariness. The words lingered. Andrew shifted in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him. The compass weighed heavily in his pocket, reminding him of promises broken. "I've missed too much," he admitted after a long silence. "When my father was sick, I wasn't there. I told myself I was building something important, but I missed the moments that mattered." Claire looked at him, her dark eyes steady. "We all make sacrifices. Some of us just don't get to choose them." She hesitated, then pulled a folded letter from her bag. It was creased from being handled too many times. She slid it across the table. Andrew recognized the bold red stamp at the top, past due. "They sold the diner's debt to a recovery agency," she said quietly. "If we don't pay in full soon, my mother could lose everything. The shop, the apartment above it, all of it." Andrew's chest tightened. He wanted to say he could write a check that moment, make the problem vanish. But he knew such words would bruise her pride. So, he only placed the letter back gently and said, "That's a heavy weight to carry alone." Claire's lips curved in a faint smile, though her eyes glistened. Alone is how it's always been. The generator sputtered again, plunging them into near darkness before the lantern flickered back. The storm howled louder, rattling the tall windows. Yet inside, the small circle of light around their table felt like its own world. Andrew noticed the sound of her chair creak, the steam rising from her mug, the way her fingers tapped lightly against the tabletop when she thought. Small details he had overlooked in years of professional distance. Now they seemed like pieces of a map leading somewhere he had never gone. His phone buzzed on the table, the vibration breaking the fragile quiet. Reluctantly, he checked the screen. A message from Victoria Lang. Let's meet privately. Investment proposal ready. Full control of data strategy on the table. Andrew stared at the words, his jaw tightening. The timing felt almost cruel. One world demanding profit and dominance, the other whispering of compassion and presence. He set the phone face down. Claire had seen the flicker of the screen, but asked nothing. She sipped her tea, her silence offering him something rarer than advice space. The night stretched on, outside, snow piled against the doors, inside. The lantern burned low, casting shadows of ship masts across the walls. Two lives, so different, had been pulled into the same harbor by a storm neither had chosen. When at last Andrew leaned back, closing his eyes, he realized he felt something unusual, not pressure, not urgency, but the quiet comfort of simply being where he was. The storm passed, leaving the streets coated in a hard crust of ice. By morning, the maritime hall was open again, the smell of salt and snow still heavy in the air. Andrew stepped back into his office, his body still carrying the warmth of the night spent in quiet conversation. But the rhythm of business returned quickly, striking with its usual sharpness. Michael was already waiting, a binder tucked under his arm. His tie was slightly crooked, his hair flattened from the wind. "She's here," he said without preamble. "Victoria Lang, and she's not just here to talk. She's got a proposal. Andrew, a serious one." Andrew loosened his scarf and glanced toward the conference room, where the glass walls gleamed under winter light. Inside. Victoria sat at the head of the table. Her red blazer caught the eye immediately, commanding the space like a flag planted on new territory. She had the kind of poise that came from knowing people listened when she spoke. Michael leaned closer. "We'd be foolish not to consider this. Competition's heating up. If Lang backs us, no one else can touch us." Andrew nodded but said nothing. His hand brushed against the compass in his pocket, its weight reminding him of another kind of direction. Still, he entered the conference room with his practiced confidence, shoulders squared. Victoria rose to greet him, extending a hand. "Andrew Whitaker," she said smoothly. "I've admired your trajectory for years. Harbor Light is on the brink of something extraordinary. With the right push, you could own the market." Her grip was firm, her smile calculated. She wasted no time spreading glossy documents across the table. Charts soared upward. Projections gleamed in bold type. "My firm is prepared to inject capital at a level that will double your rollout speed. Hospitals across the country could adopt your system within the year. Families will benefit faster, and investors will reward you for it." Andrew scanned the pages. The numbers were tempting, the kind of promise every CEO dreamed of. But then he saw the fine print. Control of the roadmap. Oversight of user data. Lang would not just invest, she would direct. He kept his voice even. "That's a significant concession." "It's alignment," Victoria corrected with a smile. "We share ambition. You want scale, I want impact. Together, we can achieve both. Alone, you'll move slower. And in this industry, slow means irrelevant." Her words carried the polished rhythm of boardrooms, the language of growth and urgency. Michael, seated at the side, nodded along. "She's right. Andrew, this market is cutthroat. If we don't grab momentum now, someone else will." Andrew leaned back in his chair, studying Victoria. She mirrored his gestures effortlessly, speaking his language with precision deadlines, metrics, dominance. For a moment, he felt the pull of it, the seduction of speed and scale. It sounded like the future he had once imagined, bold, unstoppable, admired. But a different memory pressed in the quiet sound of Claire pouring mint tea. Her mother's knitted gloves lay gently on the table. That world spoke a different language: patience, care, human pace instead of market pace. Still, the business case was strong. He found himself nodding slowly, not committing, but not resisting either. "I'll review the details," he said at last. Victoria's smile widened as though she had already won. "Excellent. Let's schedule a private meeting. Just the two of us. We'll refine the terms and ensure your vision gets the wings it deserves." Michael tapped his pen against the table. "I'll put it on the calendar." When Andrew returned to his office, Claire was already there, quietly organizing correspondence. She looked up, her expression polite, but he sensed the question in her eyes. She had likely glimpsed Victoria through the glass, seen the two of them leaning over charts with practiced ease. Andrew opened his mouth to explain, but the words stalled. He told himself there was nothing to explain. It was business. And yet, her silence made him feel as if he owed her something more. He settled for a curt nod. "Thank you for staying on top of these letters." She smiled faintly, though it did not reach her eyes, and returned to her work. That evening, back at Bennett's diner, Claire sorted the mail with slow, deliberate movements. Among the coupons and invoices lay another envelope from the recovery agency. This one bore a sharper tone. "Final notice, immediate action required." Her chest tightened as she read. The words blurred for a moment, the sound of the ocean wind rattling the diner's walls. The neon lighthouse sign buzzed faintly above her head, stubborn but fragile, like the life she was trying to preserve. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the same binder that already bulged with unpaid bills. Outside, waves slammed against the harbor wall, sending spray into the air. Inside, the diner felt smaller than ever, a place at risk of vanishing, and far away. On Andrew's calendar, a new entry appeared: private meeting with Victoria Lang. The red paper fluttered in the wind, taped across the glass door of Bennett's diner. Its letters were large, unyielding notice of foreclosure proceedings. Beneath the words, the date was circled in the heavy ink, a countdown Claire could feel in her bones. Inside, the air still carried the sweetness of warm apple pie. Ellen Bennett had risen early, as she always did, rolling dough with stiff hands and coaxing cinnamon into the crust. She believed in rituals, in keeping the doors open, in serving regulars even when the book said otherwise. Now she sat in her usual booth with a pen between trembling fingers, signing her name on a clinic form. Her handwriting wavered, each loop uneven. Claire watched quietly from across the table, forcing a steady smile. "Just another follow-up," Ellen said, pushing the form aside as though it were nothing. But her voice betrayed fatigue. Claire tucked the paper into a folder. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the red notice glared back at her. She thought of the bills stacked at home, the binder swollen with debt, and the letter that had arrived yesterday, 14 days to vacate unless full payment is received. The weight of it pressed against her chest until breathing felt like labor. That evening, after the diner closed, she unlocked a small trunk in the back room. Inside lay her father's keepsakes: a navy cap, a weathered photograph, a silver watch with a cracked face. She picked up the watch, winding it between her fingers. It no longer ticked, yet she held it to her ear, as if hoping to hear life return. She considered what it might bring at a pawn shop. A few $100s, maybe. Enough to pay late fees, not enough to stop foreclosure. Selling it would mean erasing another piece of her father. Still, the thought lingered. The bell over the door chimed. Old Sam Perkins stepped inside, hat in hand, shoulders dusted with snow. He had eaten breakfast at Bennett's almost every day since the 80s. Behind him came Mary Collins, a retired teacher, followed by two fishermen still in rubber boots. Word had spread. They had seen the notice. "We won't let them take it," Sam said firmly, though his eyes betrayed doubt. He laid a few crumpled bills on the counter. Mary placed a mason jar of coins beside it. The fishermen muttered about pooling tips from the docks. Claire's throat tightened. She thanked them, her voice soft but steady. Their kindness warmed her, but she knew the truth. A handful of dollars could not fill a hole thousands deep. The diner needed salvation on a scale none of them could provide. Later, when the last of the helpers left, Claire stood in the middle of the empty diner. The neon lighthouse outside flickered, buzzing faintly against the cold. She imagined the place shuttered, chairs stacked, ovens cold. Her mother forced from the apartment upstairs. She thought about Portland, about the corporate jobs that paid double her current salary. She could leave, take a position in some high-rise, abandon the diner before it collapsed around her. It would mean security. It would mean relief from endless bills. But it would also mean leaving her mother alone with a dying dream. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the recovery agency final demand. 14 days. The words felt like iron bars closing around her. Claire deleted the message and slipped the phone into her pocket before Ellen could see. Her mother shuffled in from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands, humming faintly as if the world outside the diner didn't matter. Claire forced her face into calmness. She would not let her mother carry this burden. Not tonight. Pie's cooling on the counter, Ellen said, smiling with tired eyes. Don't forget a slice before bed. I won't, Claire answered, steadying her voice. Outside, freezing rain began to fall, tapping against the diner's windows, hardening into ice. The storm coated the town in glass, each branch bending under weight, each street glistening with danger. Claire locked the door and stood for a moment in the doorway, the red notice snapping against the glass. She whispered a silent promise to herself she would find a way, even if it meant breaking her own heart to do it. The call came just after sunrise. Claire was pouring coffee into thick ceramic mugs at the diner counter when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, the area code local. She almost ignored it, thinking it was another collection demand, but something urged her to answer. Ms. Bennett, a calm voice said, "This is Richard Nolan with the Port Harrington Community Land Trust. I'm calling about the property where your diner stands." Claire's grip tightened on the receiver. "Yes, I wanted to let you know the debt has been purchased, effective immediately. The trust is the new mortgage holder. The foreclosure action has been withdrawn. We've restructured the terms to ensure your family keeps the property. Going forward, your payments will be reduced to a sustainable rate. No penalties, no balloon clauses." For a moment, Claire couldn't speak. The words tumbled over her like waves. I don't understand. Why would you do this? The land trust exists to protect local heritage, Nolan replied. We believe Bennett's Diner is a cornerstone of this community. It deserves to stay. You'll receive documents in the mail, but please know you and your mother are safe. The diner is secure. When the call ended, Claire lowered the phone slowly, as if afraid the good news might shatter if she moved too fast. She turned to her mother, who was sliding a tray of fresh rolls from the oven, her cheeks flushed with heat and effort. "Mom," Claire whispered, her voice breaking, "we're not losing it. The land trust took over. They cut the debt. We're safe." Ellen blinked, the steam of the rolls rising between them. Then her hands covered her mouth, trembling. "Safe," she repeated, tears filling her eyes. "Oh, Claire, that's being watched over." She sank into the nearest chair, her apron dusted with flour, and let out a sob that was half relief, half exhaustion. Claire knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around the older woman. The smell of yeast and cinnamon clung to them both, the kitchen warm with a joy they had not felt in months. Word spread quickly through town. Regulars came in, not just for breakfast, but to congratulate them. Sam Perkins slapped the counter with delight. Mary Collins brought a bouquet of carnations. The fishermen grinned, saying it was about time the town recognized what the diner meant. "It's like a miracle," one of them said, spooning sugar into his coffee. Claire smiled, but inside, her thoughts churned. She had dealt with lenders long enough to know miracles rarely appeared without reason. Why would a land trust suddenly intervene for her family? Why now? That evening, after the last customer left, she sat at the counter flipping through the paperwork that had arrived by courier. The terms were generous, almost impossibly so. Rent reduced to half of what they owed before, a long-term lease guaranteeing security, and a clause about preserving the diner as part of Port Harrington's heritage. Her instincts whispered of an unseen hand. But whose she thought of Andrew, of the quiet way he sometimes looked at her without speaking. She remembered the compass, polished and returned, as if it carried a secret language between them. Could he have been behind this? She shook the thought away. It was too far-fetched. Why would a man with billions bother with one small-town diner? And yet the suspicion lingered, half hope, half fear. For 2 nights she lay awake, torn between gratitude and unease. She wanted to believe in the miracle, but part of her needed to understand who had granted it. Across town, Andrew stood in the freezing rain, his coat collar pulled high. He had parked down the street where no one would notice. The icy drizzle tapped against his shoulders, dripping down into his scarf, but he hardly felt it. Through the diner's fogged windows, he could see Claire moving about, wiping counters, refilling salt shakers. Her mother sat at a booth, smiling faintly as she folded napkins into neat triangles. The neon lighthouse above the door glowed steady for the first time in weeks, no longer threatened by darkness. Andrew stayed hidden in the shadows. He had arranged the rescue through a network of shell companies, his name buried deep beneath paperwork. The land trust served as the face, shielding him from recognition. He wanted Claire free of debt, but he didn't want her weighed down by obligation. Still, as he watched the warm light spill across the snow, a pang of longing struck him. He could give her security, but not the words he wished he could say. Not yet. When the rain hardened into pellets of ice, he finally turned away. His footsteps echoed on the frozen pavement, fading into the night, inside the diner. Claire locked the door and turned off the lights, unaware that the man who had saved her family walked silently into the storm. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Claire arrived at the office carrying a folder of notes, the smell of diner coffee still clinging to her coat. She sensed the tension the moment she stepped into the building. Conversation stopped when she passed. Eyes darted away. The air felt charged, brittle. When she reached her desk, her computer screen was already alive with alerts. A technology news site had published a story claiming Harbor Light's upcoming safety update had been compromised. Worse, the article included a screenshot of an email, supposedly sent from her account, containing details of the confidential roadmap. Claire's stomach dropped. The subject line glared up at her update schedule, internal draft. The message appeared to be forwarded to an unknown address. Her name sat at the top as the sender. She pressed a hand against her chest, as though trying to slow the sudden emptiness spreading inside. Her first thought was that it had to be a mistake, a hack. But she knew how it would look. She was not a developer, not a strategist, just an executive assistant with access to schedules, documents, and confidential files. By mid-morning, the ripple effect was in full force. Shareholders flooded Michael with calls. The Boston hospital froze their expansion contract, citing due diligence. The company's stock slid point by point on the ticker in the lobby. In the conference room, Victoria Lang sat straight-backed, her hands folded neatly on the table. "This isn't just about one email," she said, her voice smooth but sharp. "This is about trust. Investors demand assurance that internal controls are airtight. Otherwise, we're exposed not just to leaks, but to questions of ethics." Michael shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Andrew. "We're launching a forensic review. It is combing through servers. We'll know if this was spoofed or internal." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Meanwhile, the markets won't wait. Reputations rarely survive rumors. Andrew, you need to act swiftly." Claire listened from the doorway, her pulse drumming in her ears. She wanted to shout that she hadn't done it, that she would never betray the company or him. But her throat locked. Even if cleared, the stain might linger. She returned to her desk and sat perfectly still. The glow of her monitor blurred as tears threatened. In her head, she heard echoes of last night's laughter at the diner, her mother insisting they were protected by some unseen grace. Now it felt as though grace had run out. By noon, she had made her decision. She opened a blank document and began typing her resignation letter. The click of the keys sounded loud in the quiet office. Each sentence carved away at her, but she forced herself to continue. Effective immediately. "I resign from my position as executive assistant. I believe this is the best course to protect Harbor Light's reputation during this difficult moment." She paused before the final line. Her fingers hovered, trembling. Then she added, "Please know that my respect for this company, and for you personally, remains unchanged." She printed the letter, slid it into an envelope, and placed it neatly on Andrew's desk. Her hands shook as she smoothed it flat. The compass she had once given him sat nearby, its lid closed, its surface catching the light. She almost reached out to touch it, but pulled her hand back. When Andrew returned from a tense call, he found her waiting by the door. "What's this?" he asked, holding the envelope. "My resignation," she said softly. "It's the only way to take the pressure off you, off the company." His eyes darkened. "Claire, this isn't necessary. The investigation will clear you." "Maybe," she whispered, "but in the meantime, I'm a liability. Every glance, every rumor, it points to me. If I step away, you can protect Harbor Light. You can protect what you've built." He shook his head, his voice low with urgency. "You've been nothing but loyal. I won't let a forgery define you." But Claire had already taken her coat from the back of her chair. Sometimes walking away is the only proof left. She turned before he could argue further, her heels echoing down the hall. The sound felt like finality. Andrew remained in his office, the letter heavy in his hand. Through the glass, he could see the reflection of the city skyline, blurred by winter haze. Investors wanted reassurance. Victoria wanted control. And now Claire was gone, leaving him at the crossroads of loyalty and market confidence. The compass sat on his desk, pointing north, steady and unchanging. But for Andrew, the path ahead had never felt less clear. The report landed on Andrew's desk early Friday morning, a thick folder, its cover stamped with the words, "Internal Security Findings." He opened it slowly, every page a weight he could already feel in his chest. The evidence was clear. The leak had not come from Claire. It had originated from a subcontractor, a small analytics firm hired months ago to handle testing. The firm had quietly taken investment from Victoria Lang's fund. With that investment came access privileges, the kind that could be bent, twisted, and abused. Transaction records showed late-night logins from their servers, forwarded files, data copied without authorization. Every trail led back to them. The email under Claire's name had been a forged mask, nothing more. Andrew pushed the folder away, his jaw tight, relief that Claire was innocent tangled with rage that she had suffered because of someone else's betrayal. He imagined her sitting at her kitchen table, binder of bills beside her, believing she had no choice but to sacrifice her job to protect him. She had carried the burden silently, and he had let her walk out the door. By mid-morning, the findings spread through the building. Whispers turned to shouts. Staff who had looked at Claire with suspicion now muttered apologies in private corners. But she was gone, and apologies could not reach her. The public damage was harder to erase. News outlets had already printed her name, pairing it with words like leak and breach. The retraction would come, yes, but faith once shaken rarely returned whole. Andrew faced the board that afternoon. 12 faces stared at him across a polished table, some stern, some weary. Each carried the same demand answers. Michael presented the findings in crisp summary. The breach came from a subcontractor. Claire Bennett had no involvement. She was framed. However, reputational risk remains. Contracts are on pause. Investors are restless. One board member, a gray-haired banker, leaned forward. Perception is reality in the market. Andrew, we need stability, not just truth, and that means making hard decisions. Andrew felt heat rise in his chest. The truth should matter more than perception. She resigned because she thought she was protecting us, and now we talk about her as if she were disposable. Silence followed, uncomfortable, until Michael cleared his throat. There's an option. Victoria's fund is still on the table. If we accept her investment, we get capital, stability, and the signal investors want. It's the safe move. Andrew turned toward him slowly. Safe for who? For Harbor Light, Michael replied. For the employees, for every caregiver depending on our platform. Andrew, we can't risk collapse because of pride. Taking Lang's offer could save everything. Andrew looked around the table. He saw nods, cautious but present. He understood the logic. He even felt its weight. But beneath it all was something sharper: betrayal. Accepting Victoria's money meant inviting into the heart of Harbor Light the very hand that had pulled the strings of deceit. He thought of the photographs from the fundraiser: caregivers with tired eyes, children clutching their parents' hands. He thought of Claire, pouring tea by lantern light during the storm, telling him softly that luck would mean not needing the app at all. His hand moved to his pocket. The compass was there, as always. He pulled it out, setting it on the table in front of him. The brass gleamed faintly under the fluorescent lights. The needle trembled, swinging back and forth before settling uncertainly. Not steady, not firm, just restless, like his own heart. He closed his hand around it. Harbor Light was built on the promise of trust. Families trusted us. My father's memory was the compass that guided me here. If we hand over control to someone who plays with lives as leverage, then we've already lost. No matter how high the numbers climb. The board shifted uneasily. Michael sighed, rubbing his forehead. Then, what do you propose? Andrew looked down at the compass again. The words on its lid glinted. Begin with wonder. He felt both the pull of the past and the ache of the present. He didn't have the full answer yet, but he knew one truth with certainty: selling their mission for temporary safety was no answer at all. When the meeting adjourned, he walked alone back to his office. Outside, the city moved at its relentless pace, lights blinking against the winter dusk. Inside, he sat at his desk, staring at the compass. The needle wavered, never quite still, just like him. The announcement came in the form of a short email to all Harbor Light employees, effective immediately. Andrew Whitaker will step down as Chief Executive Officer. He will continue to serve as Executive Chairman, with a focus on mission integrity and data ethics. Michael O'Connell has been appointed CEO. The word spread quickly through offices, phones, and inboxes. Some gasped, others whispered. But for Andrew, the decision brought a strange calm. For months he had felt trapped between profit and purpose. Now, he had chosen his path. In the press release that followed, Andrew wrote plainly, "Technology must serve families before markets. Our future rests not only on innovation, but on integrity. Harbor Light will remain a company that protects dignity, not exploits it." The move sent shockwaves through investors. But within Harbor Light, something shifted. Engineers looked at their screens differently, as though reminded why they had joined in the first place. Nurses and caregivers who used the software sent in messages of support. The restructuring took shape quickly. Michael assumed the CEO's chair, his talent for operations steadying the day-to-day. Andrew stepped into a new role, less about quarterly calls, more about vision. He wanted to ensure Harbor Light stayed anchored in values, but he also wanted something more. 2 weeks later, he stood at a podium in a modest hall, not a corporate tower. Cameras flashed, but the air felt less staged. Behind him hung a simple banner, Whitaker Bennett Fund for Family Care. He spoke slowly, each word chosen. This fund is dedicated to the people who carry the invisible weight: sons, daughters, spouses, neighbors who step in when someone falls ill. They deserve support, training, and time. Too often they face the choice between their job and their loved ones. We can ease that burden. The fund would offer micro-grants for family caregivers, training programs, paid respite leave, seed capital for community care initiatives. Most startling was Andrew's personal contribution, a significant portion of his own shares in Harbor Light. His wealth had once been built on the absence of presence. Now, he wanted it to be the opposite. Reporters scribbled, some investors grumbled, but among caregivers, the news spread like fire in dry grass. Then came the second surprise. Claire received the envelope on a quiet Thursday evening. It was cream-colored, sealed with Harbor Light's crest. Inside lay a letter, written in Andrew's careful handwriting. "Claire," it began, "the fund needs leadership that understands sacrifice, resilience, and compassion. I can think of no one better than you. This is not a corporate role. It is independent, with authority and vision entirely your own. You would shape the programs, the partnerships, the future. Her hands trembled as she read. He had signed it simply. Andrew. She sat at the diner counter long after the lights dimmed, the letter open before her. Her mother poured her a cup of tea, watching with quiet eyes. "He sees something in you," Ellen said softly. But Claire's heart raced with doubt. Was this opportunity a gift or a weight she could not carry? She remembered the pain of being accused, the sting of whispers. Stepping into the light again terrified her. Yet the chance to build something that could change lives stirred a hope she had buried. A week later, Andrew made his grand gesture. He walked into the Port Harrington Maritime Museum, carrying the small brass compass that had traveled with him since childhood. The curator looked surprised when he set it gently on the counter. "It belongs here," Andrew said quietly. "Soon." A glass case displayed it beside models of ships and maps of the harbor. A small plaque read, "Donated by Andrew Whitaker." This compass guided a sailor, then his son. It reminds us that the true journey is not about markets or seas, but about finding direction in life itself. When Claire visited the museum later, she stood before the compass for a long time. She traced the engraving with her eyes. "Begin with wonder." She understood now that Andrew was not just stepping aside from power. He was giving away the very symbol that had defined him. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "He sees something in you." Claire folded the invitation letter once more, her heart caught between fear and longing. Outside, gulls wheeled over the harbor. Inside, the compass needle rested steady, as if waiting for her decision. The night of the gathering was cold but clear. At the edge of Port Harrington, Mariner's Point, lighthouse glowed across the water, its beam cutting through the dark. For more than a century, it had guided ships home. Tonight, it seemed to guide something else, a town, a cause, perhaps even two hearts. Inside Bennett's diner, warmth spread from every corner. The neon lighthouse above the door hummed steadily. The long counter was crowded with mugs of coffee, plates of pie, and the clatter of forks. Regulars filled the booths, fishermen with calloused hands, nurses still in scrubs, neighbors who had kept the diner alive through good years and lean ones. Claire stood near the front, holding a stack of papers. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried a quiet glow. She had made her decision. She had accepted Andrew's invitation to lead the Whitaker Bennett Fund for Family Care. The first initiative was already underway. A program offering micro-grants for family caregivers had been approved. Training workshops were scheduled in the town library. Employers were signing on to provide paid respite leave for workers who cared for relatives at home. Claire cleared her throat, the diner falling into a hush. "This fund isn't about numbers," she said softly. "It's about people, about giving caregivers what they've given us all a long time, dignity and a voice." Her mother sat proudly in the front booth, a handkerchief pressed to her lips. Ellen's eyes shone as she whispered, "She's found her place." Andrew was there too, standing quietly at the back, letting the light fall on her instead of him. His role had shifted. He was no longer the commanding CEO. Tonight, he was simply part of the community, a man who had chosen to give rather than control. As Claire spoke, the sound of the lighthouse horn echoed faintly across the harbor, steady and low. She thought of all the nights she had sat here, counting bills and fearing loss. Now, the diner was safe, the fund was real, and her voice no longer shook when she spoke of hope. After the speeches, people lingered, they hugged, they laughed, they made plans. Nurses spoke of the relief a few hours off would bring. Sons and daughters whispered their gratitude for being seen. For the first time in years, the weight on their shoulders seemed lighter. In the corner, a small display case held the brass compass Andrew had given to the museum. But tonight, he carried it with him again. The curator had lent it back for the ceremony. Understanding the moment, Andrew held it in his palm as Claire approached. She looked at it, then at him. He opened the lid, the needle trembling before settling. "Direction isn't only about where you go," he said quietly. It's about who you walk with. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the compass. For a moment, silence wrapped them, broken only by the clink of dishes and the hum of conversation around them. Claire smiled faintly. Then, maybe we've both found north. Neither needed more. The night was not about grand declarations. It was about steady presence, about building something that lasted. Later, when the diner emptied and the lights dimmed, Claire stood at the window watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the harbor. Andrew joined her, the compass closed in his hand. She thought of the journey of storms, of suspicion, of fear, and how it had led to this, not a perfect ending, but a new beginning. In the distance, the lighthouse shone, not demanding attention, not claiming glory, just steady, just faithful. Inside, two people stood shoulder to shoulder, no longer searching for direction, but choosing it together. In the rush of modern life, it is easy to measure success by numbers, profits, promotions, or possessions. Andrew Whitaker had all of those. Yet what he lacked was presence, the simple act of showing up for the people who mattered. Claire Bennett, on the other hand, carried the quiet wisdom of someone who gave more than she received, holding her family together with sacrifice and grace. Their journey reminds us that true wealth is not found in bank accounts, but in the connections we nurture. A compass may point north, but the direction of a life is set by the choices of the heart, whether to choose power or people, ambition or authenticity. For those of us who have lived long enough to see dreams fulfilled and losses endured, this story offers a gentle reminder. The legacy we leave will not be the deals we closed or the titles we held, but the lives we touched with honesty and love. So, ask yourself, are you present for the ones who need you most? Sometimes the greatest success is simply being there steadily, faithfully, like the beam of a lighthouse guiding someone safely home. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and walking through this story of love, courage, and rediscovery. If it touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need a little light today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of what truly matters.